3 weeks after burying my husband, I stood on my own porch while my daughter-in-law tossed my things into trash bags. I'm Ellie, and what she didn't know was that I'd kept one key, hidden for decades. What would you have done if your own family tried to erase you? Tell me below, because this is what happened next. 3 weeks after burying my husband, I stood on the porch of our house with nothing but a suitcase, while my daughter-in-law tossed my life into trash bags. The November air bit into my skin, colder than it should have been for Cleveland. My breath fogged in front of me, but I kept my chin up, clutching the handle of my suitcase as if it could anchor me against what was unraveling. The movers carried boxes past me without looking, their boots thudding against the porch steps I had scrubbed every spring for nearly 4 decades. A trash bag split open near the azaleas, spilling a cascade of sweaters I had knitted during Richard's night shifts. One sleeve dangled in the damp soil like an abandoned limb. Melissa didn't notice. Or maybe she noticed and enjoyed it. She stood in the driveway, hair pulled into a sleek ponytail that probably required more hairspray than effort, her Apple Watch glinting each time she raised her hand to direct the movers. She wore yoga pants the color of steel, the kind that cost more than my entire week of groceries, though I'd never once seen her stretch for anything that didn't involve shopping bags. "Careful with the china," I called to one of the movers as he hoisted a box marked kitchen. My voice trembled against the brisk air. The man nodded politely but set it down hard anyway, rattling porcelain that had survived 2 moves, 3 grandchildren, and countless holiday dinners. Melissa smirked as if she had been waiting for my protest. "Relax, Ellie. Most of this is junk. We'll keep what matters." "What matters?" I echoed under my breath. My gaze drifted to the rocking chair Ethan was dragging across the lawn. Its wooden runners carved a sad line through the dead grass. I had rocked my infant son in that very chair, night after night, when the world outside felt uncertain, but his breath on my chest was steady. Later, I had waited there for him to return from baseball games, from college breaks, from late-night shifts at the store, and in recent years, I had rocked Grace to sleep when Melissa claimed she was too busy. That chair was more than wood and glue. It was memory nailed into place. "Where should I put this, Mom?" Ethan's voice cracked with the pitch of adolescence, eyes sliding over me without landing. He had Richard's jawline, but none of Richard's patience. Melissa didn't hesitate. "Garage sale pile." The words sliced deeper than the wind. "No," I whispered, stepping forward, my suitcase wobbling beside me. "That chair belonged to my mother before it belonged to me. Please, Melissa. It's all I have left of her." Melissa shifted her weight, arms crossed. The expensive fabric of her top stretched against her frame, a reminder that she lived in comfort built partly on sacrifices I had once made. "Everything in this house belongs to me now," she said evenly. "Richard left it all to David, and David left it all to me. You don't get to pick and choose." Grace emerged from the doorway, clutching a box labeled photos. For a moment, hope rose in me. Perhaps she would bring it to me, that gentle child who used to curl up beside me with storybooks. Instead, she set it down by the garbage cans. Her eyes flicked to mine, then darted away as if contact might burn. "Grace, sweetheart," I called softly. "Those are pictures of your father as a boy, pictures of you and Ethan when you were babies." Her lips parted, but Melissa's hand landed on her shoulder before any words could form. "We need to focus on the future, not cling to the past," Melissa said for her. The neighbors lingered nearby, rakes in hand, though the leaves were already piled. Mrs. Peterson aimed her watering can at flowers that had long since died. Her neck craned. Across the street, the Johnsons stood on their porch, whispering behind cupped hands. Their presence was both witness and judgment, but no one crossed the street to intervene. "I took care of Richard for 42 years, I said louder now, voice straining to reach over the scrape of moving boxes. I raised David. I raised these children. This house has my life in it. Melissa laughed. Not the laugh of amusement, but the hollow sound of dismissal. Your life, Ellie? Let's be honest. You've been dead weight for years. Richard supported you, and now he's gone. I'm not picking up where he left off. The words landed harder than the mover's boots. My hands shook, though whether from cold or rage, I couldn't tell. I glanced down at my suitcase, pathetic in its smallness compared to the mountain of my life reduced to bags and boxes. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, the question tasting like metal on my tongue. Melissa tilted her wrist to check the watch that never left her side. There's a senior community about 20 minutes away, affordable, or maybe a motel until you figure it out. She said figure it out like she was instructing a child to tie her shoes. I looked again at Grace, hoping for a flicker of rebellion, a trace of the girl who once begged for my bedtime stories. But she only adjusted the sleeve of her hoodie, eyes fixed on the ground. Ethan shoved the chair against the garage wall, oblivious to the splinters scratching its legs. A moving truck rumbled to the curb, brakes squealing. Melissa's face lit up. Perfect timing, she called. Everything on the lawn goes to storage, Unit 47. I'll give you the address. It hit me then. This wasn't spur of the moment, a widow's irritation spilling over. Melissa had orchestrated this. She had rented a storage unit, booked movers, probably already charmed a realtor. She had been waiting for Richard's funeral flowers to wilt, waiting for the ink to dry on death certificates, waiting for her chance to sweep me out with the dust. I glanced toward the windows, their glass catching the weak sunlight. Behind those panes, Richard and I had shared birthdays and anniversaries, argued about bills, whispered apologies. 3 weeks ago, I held his hand as his breath slowed, promising him I would be all right. He had believed me. I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. Melissa's voice broke the memory. You have until sunset, Ellie. Anything left will be donated or trashed. She gestured toward the movers, efficient in their indifference. The door shut behind her with a sharp click, the sound final enough to echo in my bones. Neighbors turned back to their yards, leaves skittering over pavement as if nothing had happened. The truck groaned as boxes were loaded, the rocking chair swallowed among them. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, knuckles pale against the fading light. The cold seeped through my coat, but I didn't move. I stood on the porch that had been mine, watching strangers dismantle 40 years of life. And through it all, one thought circled in my head, louder than the movers, sharper than Melissa's laugh. If only she knew what I had really contributed all these years. The Sunset Motel smelled of bleach and cigarettes, but it was the only roof I could afford. The carpet was threadbare, patterned with a geometry that might have been cheerful in the 70s, now dulled by decades of shoes and spilled sodas. I dropped my suitcase beside the bed, its springs creaking in protest, and stared at the brass key dangling from a plastic tag stamped with the number 12. No key card, no glowing entry system, just a chipped key attached to a ring that cut into my palm. At night, I would twist that key between my fingers, the metal warmed by my skin, its sharp edges biting whenever my hand trembled. I told myself it was only to anchor me, to remind me I still had some place, even if temporary, that locked when I turned the knob. But deep inside, I knew it echoed another key tucked beneath my blouse, one I had not touched in decades. The days blurred in gray. I spent mornings at the senior center because lunch was free on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The food was lukewarm, meatloaf with watery gravy, green beans boiled past recognition. But the women at my table didn't notice. They chatted about grandchildren's spelling bees and Florida vacations, their voices weaving around me like I was invisible. I stirred my instant coffee and nodded when politeness demanded, but no one asked for my story. Laundry nights were no better. The laundromat on Lorraine Avenue hummed with the steady rhythm of machines. I sat on a hard plastic chair, folding the same 3 sweaters again and again to kill the hours. Teenagers blasted music from their phones, young mothers wrangled toddlers, and I sat alone, listening to the buzz of dryers and the occasional clink of quarters. Sometimes I wondered if my life had been reduced to quarters, small coins traded for another cycle of waiting. One evening, the motel manager, a heavy-set man with a Cleveland Browns cap, tapped on my door. "Weekly rates due tomorrow, ma'am," he said gently, though his eyes avoided mine. He wasn't unkind, just cautious, the way people are around stray dogs. They mean no harm, but they don't want to get too close. I nodded, pulling crumpled bills from my purse. "I'll have it ready." "Appreciate it," he said, shifting on his feet. Then he added, almost apologetically, "It's better than the shelters, trust me." The words stuck to me long after he walked away. Better than the shelters. That was my comparison point now. A week before Christmas, Margaret came. I recognized the rattle of her old Buick before I saw her face. For a foolish moment, my heart lifted. Perhaps she'd bring comfort, or at least company. But when she stepped into the room, her eyes roamed not with concern, but with appraisal, as though tallying the value of what I owned. "Ellie," she began, her voice too sweet, "I thought we should talk about Richard's things." I stiffened. "I only took what was mine, clothes, a few personal items." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Susan mentioned Harold's watch, the one from his father. That should stay in the family, and the pearl earrings from his mother. They really ought to go to Grace one day." Heat rose to my cheeks. Richard gave me that watch on our 20th anniversary. He said he wanted me to have something of his father's. As for the earrings, I wore them to every holiday dinner for years. Margaret's hand fluttered toward the small jewelry box on the dresser. "You understand, don't you? These pieces hold family history." "So do I!" I wanted to scream. Instead, I opened the box with trembling hands and passed her the items one by one. She packed them into a cardboard shoebox she had brought. Her mouth pursed as though sealing a deal. As she left, she touched my arm. "You'll be fine, Ellie. You've always been tougher than you look." Her words, meant as comfort, landed like pity. When the door clicked shut behind her, I sank onto the bed. My reflection in the warped motel mirror looked back at me. Hair thinning, shoulders hunched, sweater pilled. I felt like an afterthought in my own story. Later that night, loneliness pressed in heavier than the thin motel blankets. Out of habit, I opened Facebook on the phone an old neighbor had taught me to use. Melissa's page gleamed with photos of the house, my house, now draped in garlands and white lights. A wreath I had once bought at a church bazaar hung proudly on the front door, though Melissa had captioned it, "Fresh Start Decor." Another post showed Grace and Ethan decorating a new artificial tree, the caption reading, "Focusing on the future, no room for the past." The comments from her friends applauded her strength, her independence, her ability to create light after loss. I scrolled through them with a bitterness that tasted of ash. To them, she was brave. To me, she was erasing me, painting over my years of care with her glossy version of resilience. When I finally gathered courage to call Grace, my voice shook. "Sweetheart, it's Grandma. How are you?" There was a pause. Then her small voice echoed Melissa's words. "Mom says we can't live in the past. She says you'll figure things out, Grandma." I closed my eyes, swallowing against the sting in my throat. "I just wanted to hear your voice, darling. Merry Christmas," she whispered back. "Mom says I shouldn't stay on the phone too long." And then the line went dead. I sat for a long time in the dim light, the only sound the motel's heating unit rattling against the wall. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner, though no amount of chemicals could scrub away the sense of abandonment. I reached beneath my blouse, fingers brushing the chain I had worn for decades. The locket felt cool against my skin. I unclasped it carefully, the hinge stiff with age. Inside was not just the photograph of my mother, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. Wrapped around it was the thing I had kept hidden longer than even my grief. A tiny key, its edges dulled from years of pressing against the locket's walls. I had nearly forgotten its weight, but now it seemed heavier than the brass motel key on my nightstand. I lay back against the pillows, the ceiling stained with water rings above me, and let the key rest in my palm. My heart beat faster with the memory of what it might unlock, with the thought of choices I had made decades ago. Tomorrow, I told myself as sleep finally edged close. Tomorrow, I would use that key for the first time in 20 years. The marble floors of First National Bank echoed beneath my low heels as I walked past the polished brass fixtures, my hand clutched around a small, worn key. I hadn't touched it in decades, yet it felt warm in my palm, like it had been waiting. The vault was deeper than I remembered, colder too. When the banker asked me for my name and ID, he didn't even glance up. I suppose I looked like any other older woman trying to make sense of a world that had moved on without her. He led me to box 713 without a word, only the jangle of his keys cutting the silence. When he stepped back, I inserted mine into the second lock. My fingers shook, half from nerves, half from the sting of winter still lingering in my joints. The tumblers turned smoothly. Then, with a click, the box slid forward. Inside was not gold or jewelry, but something far heavier. A brown ledger, the kind with fabric corners and a spine that had long since frayed. Beneath it, manila envelopes full of old stock certificates, deeds to properties, and a crisp envelope with the name Eleanor Marie Barnes, handwritten in Richard's square handwriting. My breath caught. That envelope would remain sealed, for now. I lifted the ledger like a fragile relic. Each page was in my handwriting. Every rent payment I had collected from duplexes I bought in the 70s, every dividend check from blue-chip stocks I had researched late at night while Richard slept. I had tucked the documents away over decades, recording, collecting, reinvesting. Richard had once said, "A man should provide for his wife." And he did, through his pension, through the house. But I had always believed in providing for myself too, just in case. Case in point, Melissa. After the banker left me in the small cubicle with the sliding metal tray, I sat there a long time. The cool metal beneath my elbows, the hush of a concrete room built to keep secrets. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was calculating. By the time I walked out of the bank, I had already composed Patricia Williams' number in my head. She had once done a guest talk at the Senior Center on Estate Transitions. No frills, no judgment, just the kind of woman who would answer a call from someone like me. She picked up on the second ring. "I'd like to liquidate $2 million, I told her. "No, I don't need to hear the risks. It's my choice." There was a pause. "Do you need it for medical reasons?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "It's for something else." 2 days later, Patricia met me in the library's private study room. We spread out the paperwork on the long oak table under the soft yellow light. Her brows rose as she skimmed the ledger, the certificates, the tidy bundle of 1099s and handwritten notes. "You've been managing this portfolio for decades?" "Yes." "By yourself?" "Yes." "And you've never told anyone?" I shook my head. They were too busy thinking I didn't know the difference between a Roth IRA and a ravioli. She smiled. "Well, Eleanor, it's an impressive estate. Conservative but strong. No debt. You could retire into a beachfront condo in Naples and never look back." I tapped the table gently. "I want to make a cash offer on a property. $65,000 over asking. No contingencies." Full inspection waived. Her pen froze over the form. "That's a bold move. It's the only one I have left." Later that night, back in my modest, furnished apartment, the kind you rent when you don't expect to stay. I opened my laptop and found the listing. There it was, 4-bedroom colonial, updated kitchen, excellent school district. Melissa had even included photos. She posed with grace in front of the new bay window, Ethan smiling stiffly near the marble island I helped fund when Richard was still alive. The caption read, "Fresh start for our family. Bittersweet, but beautiful." I stared at the words. Bittersweet? She didn't know the half of it. The next morning, I walked into Keller Realty with my offer. The young agent blinked when she saw the figure. No financing? Cash. And you're the buyer? Yes. By Friday, Melissa would find out, at the school's winter auction, surrounded by her friends and fellow board members, that the buyer of her so-called fresh start was none other than the woman she'd tossed out 3 weeks after a funeral. The last time I wore that navy dress, I could barely stand through the hymn. The organ had thundered its solemn tune while I clutched a crumpled tissue and tried to keep my knees from buckling. Now, 3 months later, I zipped it up with steady hands. The same fabric, same pearls at the collar, but this time, I wasn't walking into grief. I was walking into truth. Henderson and Associates was housed in one of those old sandstone buildings downtown. Stoic, rectangular, pretending time hadn't passed. The marble lobby smelled of lemon polish and tired ambition. I signed in with the receptionist, nodded when she offered coffee, and waited until Mr. Henderson himself opened the heavy walnut door. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, offering a professional, unreadable smile. "We're ready for you." The conference room was dimly lit despite the high windows. A long mahogany table anchored the space, flanked by high-backed leather chairs that creaked when people shifted in them. Melissa was already there, seated dead center like she owned the oxygen. To her right sat David, my son, buttoned into a blazer he rarely wore. His face was pale, unreadable. On her left was Margaret, Richard's sister, clutching a quilted handbag like it contained state secrets. I paused in the doorway just long enough to be noticed. Melissa's eyes narrowed. She offered no greeting, only a flat stare that flicked from my shoes to my neckline. "You came," she said, like I'd crashed a birthday party. "I was invited," I said calmly, slipping into the chair across from her. Mr. Henderson took his seat at the head of the table, resting his fingers lightly on a manila folder. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss certain posthumous financial arrangements." Melissa cut him off. "Before we waste everyone's time, I'd like to address the elephant in the room." She turned to me. "We've been told you're making claims on the property in Richard's accounts. I think it's only fair we ask for proof." She said the last word like it had dust on it. David flinched. "Melissa!" "No," she said, sharper now. "She's been hiding out at some motel, then suddenly she's offering to buy our house in cash? This has all the markings of manipulation. We deserve transparency." I took a breath. Not shallow, not defensive, the kind of breath you take before lighting a match. I opened my tote and pulled out 3 slim leather folders. I laid them one by one on the table. The first contained printed bank statements, 3 decades worth of interest, growth, dividends. The second folder held property deeds, 8 of them. Duplexes, a small retail strip, a house in Shaker Heights I'd renovated with rental income. The last folder, the thickest, was my ledger. I turned the ledger so the binding faced them. "This is from 1963 to now," I said. "Every dollar, tracked. Every tenant, every purchase, every repair. My bookkeeping, my life's work." Melissa gave a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "So what? You made a little extra doing taxes?" I flipped to a page and pushed it forward. It was dated 1985. "This entry," I said, "shows the down payment for a duplex on Beechwood Street. The money came from my sewing lessons, or so Richard thought. I never taught anyone how to sew. I filed taxes for half the block." Margaret leaned forward, squinting. "You've owned property this whole time?" David picked up a deed. "Mom, this has your name on it. Alone." I nodded. "Richard had his accounts. I had mine, separate, legal. We agreed in 1981 after a scare when the auto plant almost shut down. We never touched each other's reserves. It was a quiet pact. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, still neutral. I've reviewed all the documentation. It's legitimate, verified. Melissa's face paled. That doesn't mean she can buy the house. That was meant for David, for our children. I pulled out the final document, a signed purchase agreement. Cash offer, I said. $65,000 over asking, no contingencies, closing in 2 weeks. The words landed like a gavel. Melissa blinked, then stared at the document as though sheer will could dissolve ink. This isn't right, she stammered. You can't just swoop in and take over. That house is ours, was Richard's. It was listed publicly, I said. I met the asking price and exceeded it. The seller chose certainty. That's what cash offers do. David looked between us, his brow creased. You bought it outright? Why? I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because it mattered how I said it. Because no one asked me what I wanted when Richard died. Not when you sold his car. Not when you cleared out his den. Not when my rocking chair ended up on the curb. So I made choices of my own. Margaret's voice trembled. But you have money. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because no one ever listened, I replied. Not really. Melissa scoffed and crossed her arms, but her hands trembled. I've lived a quiet life, I continued. I paid bills, I sent birthday cards, I made lasagna for your anniversaries, and when Richard passed, I stayed silent out of respect. But silence isn't weakness, and invisibility doesn't mean absence. Mr. Henderson spoke, voice clipped. Legally, the transaction stands. There's no contest here. The room chilled. No one moved. Melissa sat back, deflating inch by inch. Her nails, red, perfect, clicked nervously against her phone. The woman who had thrown out my memories in trash bags now sat stunned, lips pressed so tightly they paled. David ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I told him softly. But I do hope one day you'll ask. Margaret reached for her handbag, clearly uncomfortable, and said something about traffic. Melissa remained seated, face blank. Mr. Henderson began stacking papers, reclipping files, easing the meeting to a close. I stood, straightened my dress, adjusted my sleeves. No one offered a parting hug, not that I wanted one. In the hallway, my heels tapped against the marble like a metronome. I paused by the elevator, catching a glimpse of myself in the dark glass of a picture frame. I looked older, yes, but there was something new, a steadiness. The elevator chimed. As the doors slid open, I glanced once more toward the conference room. Melissa hadn't come out. David hadn't followed. That was fine. Closure didn't need witnesses. I stepped inside and descended alone. But I wasn't alone. In my bag sat the ledger, my life in numbers, my years of planning, my answer to the question Melissa never thought to ask. Who held the power? As I stepped into the spring air, I realized something else. Power isn't loud. It's not a raised voice or a slammed door. It's a signed paper, a balanced column, a key quietly turned in a lock that was always yours. And Melissa? She was about to find out just how quiet power could roar. 3 weeks later, I stood on the same cracked driveway of 412 Maple Street, the sun warming the back of my neck as the movers hoisted the old rocking chair onto the porch. The same chair Melissa had called garage sale junk. Now, it was the first thing to return home. The air smelled like lilac and wet earth. Spring in Cleveland had a way of softening things, even bruised pride. I watched the chair sway gently as the movers positioned it beside the porch railings, its familiar creak whispering something I hadn't heard in a long time. You belong here. I hadn't seen the interior of the house since the funeral. The porch still bore the faint scratches from trash bags being dragged across the wood that day. I bent to trace one with my fingers, then stood up straighter and turned the knob. Inside, the house was a strange hybrid, part home, part abandoned project. Melissa had started repainting the living room. One wall was a soft gray, the other still cream with floral borders peeling at the edges. A tarp lay bunched in the corner, paint rollers stiff with dried streaks, half renovated, half forgotten. In the kitchen, the cabinet doors were missing. Melissa had removed them, probably to mimic some open-shelf trend she'd seen online, but never replaced them. Mismatched cups and chipped bowls were exposed like broken teeth. One drawer still had the masking tape labeled Ellie's utensils on it, though I doubted she had bothered to open it in months. I wandered through each room slowly, like walking through a version of myself someone else had tried to erase. The faint scent of my old lavender sachets lingered in the linen closet, hidden behind newer, more clinical scents of bleach and synthetic citrus. Upstairs, the hallway light flickered. The bulbs were old. She hadn't changed them. My phone buzzed. A message from Patricia. Closing confirmed. Realtor asked if you're taking the rental portfolio public. I smiled. Not because I planned to, but because the idea of my name circulating among Cleveland real estate agents felt like a poetic reversal. A woman who was once tossed out like a misaddressed letter now owned 12 doors and counting. The next morning, I drove across town to the Sunset Gardens apartment complex. A chipped wooden sign welcomed visitors beneath a drooping tree. Melissa had listed this address on the lease forms. Building B, second floor. The hallway reeked faintly of curry and mildew. A teenager's skateboard leaned against one wall, and someone's laundry basket sat unclaimed near the stairwell. I knocked twice. Melissa opened the door wearing a stretched-out hoodie and leggings speckled with flour. Her hair was pulled back messily, and her eyes looked even more exhausted than they had at the inheritance meeting. Behind her, the apartment was a patchwork of disarray. Boxes still unopened, some labeled Ethan, school files, others Grace, dolls. The sofa had a thrift store tag still hanging from one armrest. On the counter, a stack of unopened mail teetered dangerously. Electric bill, credit card, a pink envelope marked past due. Ellie? She said, like the name had too many consonants. I held out an envelope. Lease agreement. Her fingers hesitated before taking it. She blinked, then read, rental property, 1012 Lorimer Avenue. Monthly rent, $400. Term, 1 year. Conditions, stable employment, no interference in tenants' personal decisions, including contact with minors under custody of others. She looked up. You're offering me a house? It's small, 2 bedrooms, washer and dryer, near the elementary school. Why? The word was not quite defiance, more like disbelief dipped in suspicion. I looked past her shoulder to where Ethan sat on the floor, headphones in, blank stare fixed on nothing. Grace peeked from behind a bedroom door but darted out of view when she caught my gaze. Because they need a roof that doesn't remind them of shouting, and because I believe mercy isn't weakness, as long as it's not blind. Melissa swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she flipped to the last page of the lease. The signature line stared up at her. Do you think this makes us even? She asked, voice brittle. I didn't answer right away. The question was wrong. I don't believe in even, I said quietly. This isn't about revenge, it's about repair. Melissa exhaled sharply through her nose. A sound too tired to be laughter, too bitter to be acceptance. Her shoulders sagged as if the weight of everything she'd tried to balance, pride, control, appearance, had finally caved. You could have just let me fall, she muttered, setting the envelope down on the chipped coffee table. I did, I replied. Now I'm handing you a ladder. Whether you climb or not is up to you. She looked away. For a moment, we both stood in the awkward quiet of unresolved history. Behind us, Ethan removed one earbud. Is she really giving us a house? He asked, voice cracking in that uncertain space between boyhood and rebellion. Yes, Melissa said flatly. Why? He asked again, more curious than accusatory. Melissa hesitated, then turned to him and said something I hadn't expected. Because she remembers what home means more than I did. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from her. And in that one sentence, I saw it. Not a full transformation, not redemption, but a crack. A fine human crack in the armor she wore too tightly. She signed the lease with a trembling hand. I folded the paper, slid it back into my purse, and handed her a key. The house is ready Monday. First month's rent is already covered. I'll pay the rest, she said quickly. I expect you to, I replied, and to pay it on time. We locked eyes. There was no warmth, not yet. But there was recognition of limits, of boundaries, of consequences. I walked to the door and opened it myself. The hallway beyond was quiet. Somewhere down the stairs, a dog barked behind a door. Life went on, even when people didn't apologize properly, even when forgiveness took detours. Before I left, I glanced back one last time. Melissa was staring at the key like it might burn her fingers. Grace had crept out into the living room now, watching me with guarded eyes. I smiled and gave her the smallest wave. She didn't wave back. But she didn't look away either. By Friday, I was back on Maple Street. The rocking chair faced east again, just like before. I sat in it with a cup of coffee and the ledger resting on my lap. The porch floor had been scrubbed. The tulip bulbs I'd planted 2 years ago were blooming, reckless, and unapologetic. Patricia called. Your duplex on Monroe just appraised 30% higher. Want me to start looking at tenants? Yes, I said. Only families, stable income, no nonsense. She chuckled. That's you, kind with a clipboard. We hung up, and I leaned back into the rhythm of the chair. Across the street, neighbors peeked behind curtains again, but this time there was no shame clinging to me like a second skin. That night, I walked room to room and turned on every light, just to feel them glow. The house had been silent far too long. In the hallway, I passed Richard's old office. The door was ajar. Dusty shelves, a desk still scarred by years of bills and baseball scores. I didn't step inside. Not yet, but I left the light on. Later, as the moonlight stretched across the lawn and the rocking chair creaked gently under my weight, I thought of Melissa. Of all her cold words, of the bags on the lawn, of the locked door that once slammed behind me. And I thought of what I'd just done. Mercy with boundaries. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. And as the wind stirred the porch curtains ever so slightly, I saw it, just for a moment, in Melissa's eyes that afternoon. Not greed. Not defiance. Not even pride. But the faintest flicker of shame. By June, the garden in my backyard looked nothing like it did during the winter when the ivy was dead and the soil cracked from frost. Roses had returned, not just in color, but in confidence. Deep reds, soft pinks, and even that stubborn yellow bush near the fence bloomed as if they'd never known neglect. I sat on the old stone bench Richard and I had installed decades ago, back when we still believed we had forever. The air was warm with the scent of basil and rosemary, the sun soft against my skin. Somewhere above, cicadas hummed their endless summer song, a rhythm of life simply continuing. Ethan and Grace barreled through the side gate without knocking, their voices cutting through the quiet like bright ribbons. "Grandma!" Grace called, holding something behind her back. "Guess what?" Ethan jogged beside her, lanky and taller than I remembered. "Mom says you're taking us school shopping." I smiled and set down my gardening gloves. "Is that so?" Grace pulled out a folded piece of paper, a back-to-school wish list, complete with stickers, doodles, and a note in looping cursive. "Please bring Grandma. She knows how to find the good notebooks." I recognized Melissa's handwriting instantly. It was neater now. They collapsed onto the grass, laughing, sweaty from the walk. Grace leaned her head against my arm like she used to when she was little. I said nothing, just let the weight of her head remind me that some things, the right things, could find their way back. Half an hour later, Melissa appeared at the gate, her purse slung over one shoulder, keys dangling from a lanyard. She wore a navy blouse and slacks, the kind that wrinkle if you sit too long but look sharp in an office. Her hair was brushed back, and there was a faint outline of exhaustion under her eyes, but also order. "Sorry I'm late," she said, wiping her brow. "Summer traffic." She didn't apologize for anything else, and I didn't ask her to. Instead, I gestured to the folding chair across from me. "We were just picking colors for lunchboxes." Melissa gave a faint smile. "Grace will pick glitter. Ethan will pretend he doesn't care, then pick black." Ethan, with his back turned, nodded without turning. "She's not wrong." We all laughed, softly, uncertainly. The sound unfamiliar, but welcome. We didn't talk about what happened. Not directly. There were no rehearsed apologies, no speeches about second chances. Just the rhythm of rebuilding, one ordinary moment at a time. That night, as I watered the herbs near the back fence, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. "David." I stared at the screen before answering. "Hello?" His voice was quieter than I remembered. "Hi, Mom." There was a pause. I let it stretch, gave him space to choose his next words carefully. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about everything. I don't know what I got right, but I know what I got wrong." I waited. He cleared his throat. "Melissa told me you offered her the house. Not just handed it, but made her earn it. That sounds like you." "Does it?" I asked, unsure whether to be proud or wounded. David sighed. "I think I forgot what you're capable of. I always thought Dad was the planner, the one who provided. I didn't see what you were building." I looked toward the trellis, where a vine curled up toward the sky like it had purpose. "You're not the first to overlook me," I said, "but I'm glad you called." We didn't resolve everything in that call. We didn't need to. He asked if he could visit in a few weeks. Bring his wife, maybe the kids. I said yes. Then I stood in the garden, among blooming things, and let the phone rest silent in my hand. The next morning, I found Grace barefoot in the garden, carefully placing flat stones along the path like puzzle pieces. "For the butterflies," she said, "so they have somewhere cool to land." Ethan helped her, quietly stacking the heavier ones with the careful hands of someone growing into responsibility. Neither of them asked about money or the past. They just wanted to know what was for lunch and whether the old radio in the kitchen still worked. Melissa arrived after lunch, holding a small paper bag. She set it on the counter without comment. Inside, a jar of local honey, a handwritten note folded twice, and a photo, faded, of Richard and me on our wedding day. The note said only, "It was in the back of the closet. I thought you might want it back." I touched the edges of the photo like a relic. Melissa stood there, not moving. "Thank you," I said. She nodded. "The kids sleep better now, in the new place." I wanted to say, "So do I." But I let the silence answer for me. She turned to go, but paused at the door. "I'm trying. I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," I said, "but it builds something." When she left, I pinned the photo on the corkboard in the hallway. Not because I missed the past, but because I'd finally stopped hiding it. That weekend, I took the kids shopping. Not at the expensive places, just Target, where the aisles are wide and the coffee smells like home. Grace insisted on a glitter lunchbox. Ethan picked black, as predicted, but swapped it at the last second for one with a single red stripe. "Minimalist rebellion," he said, deadpan. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the coupons. At checkout, the clerk looked at me, then at them. "Grandkids?" she asked. I nodded. Mine, in every way that matters. We spent the afternoon labeling notebooks, packing folders, and arguing over whether pre-sharpened pencils were superior. They are. I watched them take up space again, not just in the house, but in my life. That evening, I stood on the porch while cicadas buzzed and the roses caught the last of the sunlight. The house breathed easier now. The walls didn't hold secrets anymore. No locked safes, no ledgers in hollow drawers, just light and laughter and the long, quiet stretch of summer. Grace curled up beside me in the rocking chair. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Are you really rich? I looked at her, eyes wide, cheeks sun-flushed, barefoot and hopeful. Having money doesn't mean buying everything, I said slowly. It means choosing what matters. She nodded like she understood, or maybe just liked the sound of it. Either way, it was enough. Later that night, I walked through the house, touching the backs of chairs, the cool glass of picture frames, the worn edges of counters I'd once scrubbed with sorrow. Nothing glittered, nothing grand, but everything felt right. When I reached the garden again, the moon had risen high. Fireflies blinked in the bushes. Somewhere far off, a train whistle cut through the warm dark. And I stood there, still and whole. For the first time in 40 years, the walls around me weren't hiding a secret. They were open, letting the light in. Sitting in my garden, watching the roses bloom again, I no longer counted what I had lost, but what had quietly returned. Light, peace, and the soft rhythm of family finding its way back. I once believed dignity was the last thing I had left. But it turns out, grace with firm boundaries can rebuild more than walls. It can rebuild a life. In this world, not everyone who enters stays. But if we stand tall and stay kind, the ones who matter will find their way home. If this story reminded you of your own journey or someone you love, I'd be honored if you shared a thought below. Sometimes, the smallest reflections open the biggest doors.